Grinders. Welcome to RotoGrinders Today. I'm Jordan Cooper, a.k.a. BlenderHD, BlenderHD. If you want to follow me on Twitter. And it's Monday, February 12th. And you know what we do on Mondays? It's Mondays with Mccool. I bring on James Mccool, the co-author, with me on the theory of daily fantasy sports. It's a 15-hour audio DFS masterclass you can pick up at theoryofdfs.com. Hit that thumbs up button on your way in the door. Hit the thummy thumbs, hit the likey likes, hit the subscribe button if you're new here. Hit the notification bell to always know when we go live. James, you told me a minute before we started. You didn't even watch the Super Bowl yesterday.
No.
We were going to review it. I have results DB here. I'm going to talk about SimLab stuff. And you just like, it's an island game. You assume that the game is going to suck because how does anyone watch actual NFL game with commercials and everything live? Red Zone's fine, but you treated it like any Sunday Showdown slate of like game's probably gonna suck, not gonna watch it.
No, I mean I thought it was gonna be a good game. I thought, okay, so first off, you're like, oh, we were gonna review the slate. We were gonna acting as if I watch any of the sports we review. You don't have to watch sports to play DFS. I watch sports very sparsely. Usually I do watch the Super Bowl. Yesterday, I don't know, man. Maybe I just have a little bit of Patrick Mahomes attrition, and I don't know. It was a good game on paper. I thought that San Francisco probably should have won. But you never bet against Patrick Mahomes, and that proves out true again. So, I don't know.
What did you do? What were you doing? What were you doing that whole time? What were you doing?
I don't know. It's funny. I thought to myself, hey, the Super Bowl has started. I'm going to go to Walmart and get grapes. I just went to Walmart. And I got grapes, and I got some bell peppers. And I got, here is something that I did. So I'm kind of a frozen pizza connoisseur, all right? I think that like most freezer pizzas suck, okay? And that's not like surprise to anyone. But you can find some pretty decent freezer pizzas out there. And currently, there is a freezer pizza out there. I think it's DiGiorno. I'm pretty sure it's DiGiorno, but it's a croissant crust. It's like a flaky. Have you had it?
Yes, remember, I'm in Louisville now, so like it's hard to get actually good pizza. So when we do have pizza, it's going to be whatever the hell. And yeah, I would rate from the freezer pizza brands, DiGiorno is number one.
Oh yeah.
I prefer the rising crust.
Fair. Okay.
Or DiGiorno, but we've had the croissant one, and my wife gets my wife likes the smaller Totino's pizzas. I'm not a big fan of those, but I mean that's what she likes. I don't know where that is on your list of as a freezer pizza connoisseur.
I mean, Totino's as a pizza sucks, but if you eat Totino's as Totino's, it's fine. Like it's kind of like. You can't really there's certain things you can't really treat as what they are supposed to be. You just think about them as like a separate entity on the food pantheon of things. And Totino's party pizzas, while they suck if you try to eat them as a pizza, they're totally fine if you're just eating them as a Totino's party pizza. And that's fine. It's kind of like Hot Pockets, right? Like you don't eat Hot Pockets because you're wanting to have like a nice scrumptious pastry. But like you eat Hot Pockets because you just want to have a Hot Pocket, and as long as you treat it like a Hot Pocket, it's fine. So that's kind of how
I like Campbell's chunky soups, and I know that it's not the best soup, but for what it is, there are some flavors that are good.
Right? Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that too many people you can apply this to a whole bunch of different things, right? Like as long as you just view it in the scope of that thing, it's fine. Just don't try to fool yourself into thinking that it's something else. You can do that with a lot of movies. That's a big thing with movies too, right? Like when it comes to prequels and sequels and stuff, if you just view it as that and try not to compare it to something else, like a live action remake, if you just view it as that, it's probably fine. But as soon as you try to compare it to something else, it's just like, well, you missed the whole point. Just sit down and enjoy something, you know?
It's like the NFL. Nerdy Tedder says, as an entertainment product, it sucks. But as NFL, like football, I mean, we're going to have the UFL coming up soon, the Spring League, and that's going to be awful.
It'll suck so bad.
That the NFL is great when it comes to football. Yeah. But, I mean, there's probably plenty of other forms of entertainment that are way better than football. Although the second half of the game was pretty entertaining. I preferred if the second half played out like the first half. In Showdown, I played 40 lineups. I used here our sim labs. Yep. I said on Twitter, I'm building 40 lineups in 40 seconds. So I built 40 lineups in 40 seconds, and I was doing pretty well. And I mean, I adjusted some advanced settings here. I mean, I was doing well with what I was doing. And props wise, overtime, I mean, didn't kill me, but I had a lot of Brock Purdy under passing yards in like 5 out of 5, 6 out of 6s.
Yeah.
Like in like prize picks, underdog, that type, but SGPs, right? I like under Ayuk receiving yards, under Deebo Samuel rushing yards, under Brock Purdy, under 249.5. And of course, overtime got him to 255. So that busted a lot of things. But overall, I mean, I hit 80% of my props. It's just that, in those, because you get Super Bowl week, James, the books like throw bonus stuff at you and boost stuff, but it's never for single stuff. It's always like, oh, we'll boost your SGP for $50, 50%.
Yeah.
Minimum odds, plus 400 or something like that, So I'm putting a lot of those together, and I was like one off on so many of them that I ended up kind of breaking even even though I hit 80% of the other props, just that I like missed on all those SGPs off by what Rashee Rice over 6.5 receptions. You got 6. It's like right there. And then I also, James, was able to put together a 0.2% spread.
Wow.
Between Chiefs +3.
Yeah.
And 49ers money line.
Wow. Got a little hard there.
Well, it's not. Well, I mean, it's not. It's a middle, and I'm paying 0.2% for the middle. So, like, I think I lost like $7 on that, right?
Sure.
On the Chiefs side, because I had to pay a little extra to get the +3.
Yeah.
Because I got it at the height of where the books wanted Chiefs money. So, so I was rooting for the 49ers to win by 1 or 2 so I could win both bets. So that kind of was a wash. So that kind of was what I was rooting for during the Super Bowl. And in Sim Labs, since obviously we have a course, right?
Yeah.
Theory of DFS. We can put it on the screen, right? We talk about macro strategies, right? Here's Sim Labs. Here's, obviously Theory of DFS. We have a product here, Sim Labs. Now it's available for NBA. It's now available for PGA also. And I'm assuming MLB will have that, in 7 weeks or so. People get what these like advanced settings are, and it's not like lineup HQ when dealing with Sims, right? So I wanted to especially for Showdown slates, and especially for NFL, for a sport like NFL, NBA, there's not that much correlation. So it's a little bit difficult, but understanding the macro of what types of lineups are you building.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, yesterday for the Super Bowl, there are outcomes where it's a high scoring game. There's outcomes where it's a low scoring game. There are outcomes where one team blows out the other team. They all have a probability attached to it. And depending on those outcomes, obviously the types of lineups that will be optimal or win Showdown contests will look differently.
Mm-hmm.
But a lineup that is like, 49ers blow out the Chiefs may have the same expected value as a lineup that the Chiefs blow out the 49ers.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They happen a small percentage of the time, but compared to their ownership, they happen more often than what they'll be owned, and they end up becoming profitable. So thinking from a macro perspective of not like you're not trying to predict what is going to happen, right? The more useful thing is to predict how the field is going to react.
Right.
So my attitude yesterday was that the field is building as if this is a high-scoring game.
Yes.
So I built lineups that were for more lower-scoring games. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because high-scoring games, I mean, McCaffrey, Mahomes, Purdy, Rice, Kelsey, Debo, Ayuk, Kittle. I mean, a lot. And then obviously there's some cheapy guys down there. But like I said, I did 40 lineups in 40 seconds in SimLabs.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, how do you build? You look at this and you go, there's no option for me to put in a score to go like build me lineups as if it's a 17-3 game. Like there's no way of doing that. That's in obviously these simulated lineups have those outcomes in there.
Sure.
Right. From a general note, any lineup that you get out of SimLabs is going to be a competitive lineup.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no well, I did these settings and got these 40 lineups, and I did these settings and got those 40 lineups. My 40 versus your 40 is probably just as good as one another. Mm-hmm. Mine may rely more heavily on different types of outcomes, and yours may rely on other types of outcomes. And if you want to condense the types of lineups and the types of outcomes, this is what the advanced settings can do for you. So people look at this like it's lineup HQ, right, James? You see, in simulation tools, people try to use it like an optimizer,
right?
And it's not. It's not. It's not a. Here's the projection and build me lineups with these constraints and these groups and everything like that. Like it's not that. It's meant to handle all of that already for you. I consider simulation tools to be kind of like doing the work of, is this lineup too leveraged? Is this lineup under leveraged? That type of stuff, that it kind of does it for you, assuming that the inputs that are in there are accurate, right? If you had Marquez Valdes-Scantling at we had him at 13% projected owned, he came in at 20.
Yeah, that's going to
throw. Now, obviously, that's going to affect some stuff, right? I mean, these types of things. So we talk about the three levers, right, James? Projection, correlation, and leverage. What is the difference? What is the difference? I don't know how to phrase this question. In NFL, if it's a high-scoring game versus a low-scoring game, let's take the extreme examples. A 54-48 game versus a 7-6 game.
Yeah.
What do optimal lineups, optimal meaning that the best possible lineup that could be made with the most amount of points, which is kind of in Showdown what we're aiming for. What are the differences in the projection, correlation, and leverage aspects in both of those scenarios compared to one another?
When it's a low-scoring game, correlation matters a lot less. That's kind of like the first thing that I think of when you're talking about these kind of edge outcomes is a lot of the time when we're looking at correlation, what we're trying to do is we're trying to maximize the amount of fantasy points that are shared within players. If there's a lot of fantasy points to go around, correlation matters a lot more because it means it's likely to be centralized around guys who have correlation together, right? In NFL, that gets a little bit muddied. In MLB, which is coming up, then that's kind of like the more pure version of this, right? Where when a team only scores 1 or 2 runs, fantasy points are not likely to be correlated well together, or the correlation matters less. There's likely to be 1 or 2 guys score a bunch of points, whether it's a home run or something like that, and then a whole bunch of guys that don't score very much at all. Whereas if a team scores 10 runs, then very likely the correlation between the players matters a lot more because people running guys in, RBIs matter, home runs, all that kind of stuff. So correlation,
and that's represented by a coefficient. So like
right.
when we say that correlation, we're like, okay, these two players, all the players on a baseball team or players on an NFL, the quarterback and wide receiver have a correlation coefficient of 0.42, right? NBA, they may have a correlation of 0.06, which is way lower, right? League of Legends, 0.94, right? Very, very high, right? So the more that one person scores, the more that it's related to other people's scores, right? Because the correlation, the less someone scores, the less other people score.
Right.
So in higher scoring games, optimal lineups are more likely to be correlated, to look more, to have players that perform well together.
Yeah, I would say
games,
I would quickly just say that I would phrase it. I wouldn't say that higher scoring games lineups are likely to be more correlated. I would say that higher scoring games correlation is more likely to matter.
Right.
I wanted to like clarify that because that is kind of an interesting distinction between what correlation is and what it does for lineups.
Right. And then when it comes to projection, right? Projection we're considering as a mean, right? So in higher scoring games, projection matters from a general standpoint. Projection, whether it be mean or ceiling or whatever you want to call it, will matter more than in lower scoring games. Why? Because the outcomes are much more condensed. So think of in a 54, 45 game, like Christian McCaffrey could have like 48 points, right? Yeah. And Patrick Mahomes could have throws for 4 or 5 touchdowns, stuff like that. It's going to be very hard for Clyde Edwards-Helaire with 5 carries, even if he scores a touchdown on one of those carries, to score enough points to make the optimal lineup when so many points are being scored by all these players that 10 points ain't enough, even for his price, right? Jerick McKinnon getting 6 points ain't enough, right? There's so many points being scored. In lower scoring games, the points are much more condensed, right? The highest scoring play in a 7-6 game, it's like, dude, like in this game, like yesterday, it's like it's quite possible Christian McCaffrey's 18 points is the highest raw point score on the slate. And whoever scored that weird touchdown, like Charlie Warner scores a touchdown. Well, he may still be the 8th highest scoring player on the slate. I mean, the pricing, the salaries and the pricing don't matter as much, and the mean projection doesn't matter as much because the guy that scores 3 points versus the guy that scores 12 points are much more closer to each other, as opposed to in a high scoring game where, your field goal kicker has, 2 extra, has 5 extra points and a field goal. It's like, dude, they're not even close to the optimal lineup because, like, you're not going to be able to get in for even at 3K. You're not going to get in for 8 points because, there's 11 people with double digit scores and 6 people with over 20. Like, it's not going to matter. So from a projection standpoint, in a higher scoring game, projection matters more. Lower scoring game, projection matters less. And then from a leverage perspective, higher scoring game, leverage matters less. Right? If you want to count that as, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but raw points matter. That, like, it doesn't matter how much leverage you got from a non-Christian McCaffrey lineup. In a high scoring game where he scores 3 touchdowns and he's 99% owned, like, well, I faded him because he's over-owned. It's like, yeah, but he scored 46 points. Like, it doesn't matter, right? In a high-scoring game, especially. In a low-scoring game, leverage matters a lot more because there's a lot more opportunities for people that score less points than those people to matter more. Mm-hmm. So those 3 things combined.
Yep.
So James, let me ask you, in SimLabs, we have these simulation weights. And all this does is tell SimLabs how to calculate the SimLabs score.
Sure.
Right? So, like, if you were to, for instance, in theory, if I bring down everything, right? If I bring down everything to 0, and put projection weight to 100.
Yes.
In theory, and I want one lineup. In theory, the lineup that I get should be basically the same lineup that if I press the optimize button in lineup HQ. It's going to be the highest mean projected lineup.
at the very least, it will give you the local maxima. Maybe not the global maxima, but the local maxima.
Right. But basically what I'm telling the sim labs is that I want you to rate my lineups, right? It already has all the lineups in there. It's already been simulated out. But I want you to display the lineups with a sim lab rating of out of 100, where 100% of the 100 is projection. So basically, it's basically saying that I don't care about any of the simulations. I don't care about the optimal rates ownership. I don't care about the ceiling. I don't care about the correlation. Just if a lineup is extremely correlated, has a lot of ceiling and a lot of optimal players, but it's like 20 points lower projected, like it's not the sim lab rating is going to be very low.
Yeah.
Even though the lineup has a great shot at possibly winning first place, you're just saying that based on the weights of these numbers, I want it to be the highest projected lineup. So that's essentially what these things are. So simulation weight is the simulations. Like we've run the game out 100,000 times. Well, all different types of outcomes that happen because of that. How much do you want to weigh just those game outcomes? Right? And get lineups that match those game outcomes. Projection is what we talked about. The mean projection. How much do you want to weight in the SimLabs rating of the projection? Ownership, people get wrong. I want high owned lineups. It's not high owned lineups. Ownership means this optimal rate. So we've already run all the simulations, and Christian McCaffrey in the flex is optimal 45% of the time. Patrick Mahomes optimal 43% of the time, right? You go down, Justin Watson optimal 12.9% of the time. When you're doing this ownership weight, you're doing how much weight do you want to put on having more of the players that are more likely to be optimal?
Right.
Now, typically they end up being the more owned players, but I mean, it's not necessarily. But it's basically saying, like, if you ratcheted up the ownership weight, you're going to get a lot. You're going to get you're going to get mostly Christian McCaffrey lineups, and you may not get any lineups that don't even have Christian McCaffrey in it. You may get a lot of lineups that have McCaffrey and Mahomes because you're prioritizing in your rating players that are more optimal. You're less likely to get Chris Conley in lineups. You're less likely to get Jordan Mason or Elijah Mitchell in lineups because they're optimal so little, right? Upside weight is easy, right? We talk about the ceiling, right? That's very similar to projection, ceiling, and then correlation of how correlated the players are to each other. So in a high-scoring game, maybe, right? In a high-scoring game, maybe you want you want high ownership weights, right? High scoring game, you want a lot of correlation, maybe a lot of projection, right? Maybe you don't need the optimal rates as much, medium, I mean whatever you want to do. But high scoring games, you should focus a lot more on correlation and projection, right? In addition to what the games are simulated. Most of the default settings default to, right, the types of, what you should kind of be doing for higher scoring games. But for lower scoring games, like yesterday, I'm like, I don't want any. I literally took off projection and correlation and upside weight. I mean, I kind of built all my lineups based on give me all the simulated outcomes, right, with optimal players in it. Like, just give me all of that. I don't even care what the projection is. Now, I built like 100 of them, and then I selected my 40, right? I went through and said, I don't want to play that. I don't want to play this. You could do that in SimLabs. But this is the macro thinking. And you don't have to make the weight 0 if you don't want to. I mean, you could do whatever hell you want here. And the lineups that I'm getting for this may be similar to some of the lineups that, if I do it this way, just the equal kind of like simulation 53, projection, kind of the defaults. You may get similar. There may be a lineup in that matches similar situations as well.
Yeah.
So it's not a like, what are the correct set? Never come to this with what are the correct settings. If you come to SimLabs and you literally mash on the keyboard and say, I want 20 lineups, the 20 lineups that you're getting are going to be, from an EV perspective, theoretically, similar to my lineups. And if you bash your head against the keyboard multiple times, the 20, they just rely on different outcomes. And if you want to put in your take, right, you go into settings and say, I don't want to play any, I want to play all the Travis Kelce because of Taylor Swift. Okay. Yeah. It'll show you the 20 line. It'll just show you Travis Kelce lineups. But all the lineups it's going to show you are not bad, right? They're all going to be good to some extent. They're just going to rely on different outcomes. So you could expand this types of thinking to other sports. Like we have NBA, right? We have MLB. MLB is the easiest one. When MLB SimLabs is available, we're going to have these, on a large slate, James. On a large slate, you probably want to play more correlated lineups, right? Yeah. On a small slate, you may actually be more inclined to play less correlated lineups, right? We talk about this, right? There's 13 games on a slate. The likelihood of one team putting up 8+ runs, well, there's 26 shots of it, as opposed to a 3-game slate where there's only 6 shots of it, right?
Right.
And then you have like slates where it's 7 games and it's all pitchers duels. And maybe you look at that and go, well, maybe no team puts up 8+ runs. Well, if no team puts up 8+ runs, it's quite possible that there's no 5-man stack that gets there. So maybe if you were using something like SimLabs, you'd go, well, now I want a little less correlation, right? I want a little more of this. I want a little more of that. Those types of things. So thinking in those terms, that's why we try to teach macro-based strategies. Macro strategy, how to think about DFS as mathematically.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I've also used SimLabs quite a bit, just playing around with it. But I really like the concept of being able to control the things like leverage and ownership and stuff like that. The way that I look at it, you kind of described it earlier as to the lineups have already been built. So what is SimLabs actually doing? What it's doing is it's kind of doing the second part of the what I call the intuitive part of it, of saying, well, if I'm thinking about a game that is going to go this situation or that situation, then how would I like to approach that game? I think that SimLabs does best in terms of Showdown. I think that it does best in terms of smaller slates, because you can really zero in kind of on how you would like to approach certain things like that. And that's how I have been building Showdown lineups for years now, right? Is looking at the game and not necessarily looking at the projections, but looking at how to build a lineup that makes sense in terms of the game outcomes that I think are likely. So SimLabs does a really, really good job of that.
And then it also depends on the contest that you're playing, because there's going to be a much different. You're playing, small field, single entry. Like, that's why we have these options of like, you're playing single entry. Single entry in a 100,000 person field is still a large field contest. Yeah. I prefer if this was called like small, medium, large, rather than single entry, small field, large. But
for what
that's what it means, single entry.
For what it's worth, after building out a contest sim product myself, like it's so hard to figure out what options to put for contest field. It's because there is such a wide range of contests that you can sim for, and it's just like, what kind of actual control do you want to be giving? And because trying to simulate a 100,000 person contest, it's like, you can certainly do that if you'd like. You can take the time to put that together, but that sim's going to run for a while. So let's just say large field instead and try to run it on that with some generalized statements. So it's that part's hard, and I sympathize with the people who built this.
Right, but essentially, like, if same types of things apply. Of like, if you're playing a small single, like if you were going to play a small single entry 100-man contest, like, do you have to play Blake Bell in your lineup?
Right.
No. I mean, how unique do you really have to get? So depending on what the contest and what results range means, how many lineups are we willing to consider? Now, if you consider 85% of the possible lineups, you may get lineups towards the bottom that actually are not very good at all. If you do results range 15%, you're going to be very condensed on the very best of the lineups, but your diversity is going to go. I mean, if you build 20 lineups based on a very low results range, you may end up with a lot of 1v1s, which you may be fine with. I mean, that's up to you, right? So that's what this tool is for. There's no correct setting, but just beat in your head. Put a little notepad, little note, post-it note if you're going to use this. There are no correct settings, right? You could put in, it's like, oh, I'm going to play a 100-man contest. I'm going to put in a large field contest, high result range, and all the correlation and whatever like that. It's not going to give you the best lineup for that type of contest, but it's not going to give you a bad lineup, right? It's just that maybe if you're playing a 100-man field, maybe you should prioritize projection a little bit more than ceiling, right? But it doesn't mean that you can't just, I'm going to go 100% ceiling, and that lineup is like bad. It's like, it's not the best for that type of lineup, but it's not a bad lineup. SimLabs does not build bad lineups, especially in the very low results range, right? The top 15% of lineups, no matter what you put in, is going to be a competitive lineup. We could argue on which ones are slightly more EV than others, right? We could obviously argue on, well, this guy comes in more owned than that guy, then that lineup may be a little bit less. Like, you could argue those on the margins. But for the most part, when you use SimLabs, you're going to get good lineups. Just a matter of what we say on the show all the time. On a 12-game NFL slate, there may be like 100,000 good lineups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I want to play 3. Well, you can play, and feel free to just randomly pick 3 out of 100,000, and you're probably be fine from a mathematical perspective. But if for whatever reason you're like, well, I want to play this, okay, as long as those 3 are within the subset of those 100,000, you're good, right? You're fine, right? That's kind of what SimLabs is. It's like, we've already come up with all the lineups, right? It's just a matter of, how do you want to choose which 150 do you want to play? Which 20 do you want to play? Which 5 do you want to play? Do you want it as diverse as possible? Do you want it as narrow as possible? Do you want to have certain players that, like, we have this jar of marbles, right? They're all, we have 12 billion possible lineups that are green marbles, and then the red marbles are the 100,000 that are actually good. You put your hand in, like, you want to grab the red marbles, but it's all different outcomes and all different types of things. But we've already taken out all those red marbles and said, hey, which ones do you want? That's what SimLabs is.
I do think that as a caveat to using simulation tools and to reinforce the point of the lineups that it is serving you are good, but it does not necessarily mean that you will have the same lineups that Jordan built, the same lineups that TJ built, or the same lineups that Dean built, or any Squirrel Patrol. Like, you are not guaranteed to get the same lineups. It is very different than an optimizer from that perspective. And that is something that I think needs to be very clear with this kind of stuff and be very forward, because it is very easy for customers and subscribers to feel slighted if they're like, well, I used it and I used the top 20 and I didn't have the same. Like, the settings matter. You're still getting good lineups. Just be clear that the lineups that you create, this is not an optimizer. This is not an optimizer. It is not going to give you the exact same set. There is no clear and concise way to put together the settings that are going to give you the exact same set of lineups that other people are going to.
It may give you the same exact expected value.
Yes,
of lineups.
Right.
That's what I mean. If you put in one lineup, right? You put in like 1 or whatever like that, and you run whatever the hell you want, and then you get that lineup. And that lineup could be a San Francisco blowout lineup.
Mm-hmm.
And then you put in one and same set. I put in the same settings and get like a competitive game with 2 field goal kickers in my lineup. Mathematically, the expected, maybe they both have a 12% ROI overall. Maybe there's a 12-cent, it's positive. They rely on completely different outcomes, but if you simulated this out 100,000 times, by the end of the 100,000, my lineup and your lineup would end up with the same amount of money overall. Right. It's just a matter of what outcome happens today. I don't know, but over the course of all those simulations, these lineups have similar, if not very close, expected value, but they rely on different outcomes, right? They were different distributions of outcomes, right? My lineup that with the blowout lineup may not even cash like 90% of the time, but when it wins like first way more often than yours, and in yours cashes like 3 times more often than mine, but doesn't win first as often as mine. But over the course of the 100,000 simulations, it equals about the same amount of money, right? So that's the type of stuff that it's spitting out. That's why you'll look through and go, oh, I built 100 lineups to choose 20 from, and yeah, it's giving me lineups with Kyle Juszczyk, and I don't want him. It's like, so feel free to not pick lineups that don't have Kyle Juszczyk. It's not saying that Kyle Juszczyk is doing well. Just in those scenarios, in those lineups, Kyle Juszczyk ends up being optimal in those scenarios. But it's quite possible that you don't see Kyle Juszczyk in lineups that, leave 10K on the table.
Right.
Right? It's like, because they don't go together. But in those specific lineups, and if for whatever reason you want to choose him, don't play him. But there are going to be scenarios where Juszczyk scores 2 touchdowns, and you're like, why not? Like, we had, Jawan Jennings and Mccool Hardman in the optimal lineup yesterday. So they weren't have a very high chance of being optimal. Mccool Hardman was 4% in our sims. Right? He caught a 52-yard pass, and he caught the game-winning touchdown. That's all he needed for that price. And he beat out he beat out kickers, and he beat out defenses, right? Now, if you had a very low results range and you were playing single entry stuff, you probably would barely ever see Mccool Hardman in any of your lineups. Mm-hmm. But if for whatever reason you wanted to have a high results range or whatever, maybe you would see more Mccool Hardman. And if you're the type of person that's like, hey, no matter what, James, I'm going to play Mccool Hardman in the flex.
That is that is my mom.
Okay.
my mom loves Mccool Hardman. Anytime that he's on the slate, she puts him in a showdown lineup every single time.
But let's say that's your only take. Let's say your only take is that I want to make sure to play Mccool Hardman. Well, put him in the lock players. You could use SimLabs. Mm-hmm. You put up Mccool Hardman and run whatever the hell lineup. So it'll at least show you the Mccool Hardman lineups that are good, right? So you're not building a Mccool Hardman that isn't good, right? We could do that for NBA. I think that's a good thing to do. And now our SimLabs for NBA has not come out for today yet. It doesn't typically till later in the day because NBA, LOL.
Right.
What's the point this early? That's what I would suggest how you use NBA, because a lot of the, there's not that much correlation in NBA, right? There's not many these are going to be high scoring slates and those are going to be low scoring slates and this is going to be whatever. I mean, there's not as much of that in there. What I would suggest using SimLabs for is, even if you want to just run 150 lineups just to see, who shows up more, what players show up together more, or you already have someone in mind. You're like, I'm definitely playing this guy and that guy today. Okay, put them in the lock. Put them in lock players section, and then run 20 lineups and go, what are the best simulated lineups that I can make with those 2 players?
Right.
Or maybe you don't want to play a certain player. It's like, I'm going to fade that guy today. Okay, well, exclude that player and just run 20 lineups in SimLabs and go, what are lineups that do not have this player? Mm-hmm. What do plus EV lineups look like? Because we talk about that all the time in Lineup HQ. You kind of have to do that yourself, right? You have to look at it and go, if I'm going to play a high-owned player here, that means I have to play a low-owned player there. If I'm going to play a high-salary player in this spot, I have to play a cheap center. Yeah, you could do that. You could piece that. With experience, you're used to doing that. But if you want Sims to take care of that for you, that's what this tool is used. We'll see that for baseball, James, right? Mm-hmm. I want to play the Vomit Tiger stack. It's like, okay, well, what are those lineups What pitchers do I play with those?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I want to pay up for the Braves. 5-man stack. It's like, okay, what did those types of line? Do they have 3 one-offs? Do they have a 3-man in them? Do they have like what do those plus EV lineups look like? That's what sim labs could be used for. I mean, we don't have, MLB yet. PGA, you can do the same thing. It's like, oh, I'm gonna play Nick Taylor. It's like, what do Nick Taylor plus EV lineup? I'm gonna play Nick Taylor and Charlie Hoffman and somehow be from the future and know who's gonna be 1 and 2 in the Phoenix Open. But like, what do those lineups look like? I guarantee you, if you played Nick Taylor and Charlie Hoffman in your lineup for this past PGA event, you could have played the 4 chalkiest golfers in your lineup and been perfectly fine.
Oh yeah,
right. It would have told you that, right? But if you're putting 3 chalky lineup golfers together, maybe you'll see that. Oh, I can't play that 4th chalky guy. It's not coming up in these, the better plus EV lineups. It's not only to build lineups, it's also as a research tool.
Right. And that's actually what I think it's used best for. I think that most of the simulation tools on the market are best used for research and understanding roster construction and understanding where edge lies on players. Like Christian McCaffrey should be this high owned. He's projected to be this high owned. Is there any edge there? Things like that. That's what I think they're used best for. And then continuing on with your typical process outside of that and saying, okay, well, now I have the information of how lineups should look. If I want to build for this, I have information on what players are over or undervalued. So I know what players I would like to see more or less of. And then going through a regular process and building towards those kinds of things. Now, obviously, SimLabs can do all those things for you. But if you'd like to have a little bit more control, if you're somebody who wants to have a little bit more control over the micro settings and stuff, and if you're very well versed in using an optimizer to build out your lineups, simulation tools are a great way to get a base of research to understand how your lineup should look and what players you should be focused on.
ANS Comedy asks, do you have any sims for prop betting as well? You don't need sims for prop betting. We have mean projections. We already make the projections. So I mean, there's projections are made through sims as well. So once you have that number, you're fine. You don't need sim labs for that.
I actually have simulation tools for prop betting over at Pater, if you'd like those. Just saying, you can simulate out certain outcomes and stuff like that.
Right, but you have to check. It's that those types of tools are more for, oh, I think this is going to happen during the game. What do the numbers look like if this happens? Right.
Yeah, you can do stuff like that. Yeah. Right. You can. So like the way that I set it up is where you can put in that there's 2 different ones. But the main one, if we're talking about just like simulating things out, you put in what the line, you put in the player, you put in the prop that you're considering, and then you put in the line of the prop. So you can do it with alts. I know that a lot of people do it with alt lines. Like you can say, how often does Luka Doncic score 45 instead of 35 or whatever like that, and then you can simulate out that kind of stuff. It's best for alt lines. It's not as good for like median lines because we like Jordan said,
we already have that's the normal output are the mean lines. And if you use the bat or the blitz, like if you use Derek Carty's the bat, he has percentile projections. So like you could use those for alts. You don't need, that's what I mean by like, you don't need to simulate props when you would need to simulate props if you didn't have projections. You would have to put in like, what's his target share and what's the score of the game and what like then run out the game simulations and then come up with, the distribution of outcomes for that player and where the mean and the median and the mode are. Like we do that. That's what DFS projections are already. Right. So you don't need to simulate a projection of a projection. Like you're doing that twice for no reason.
Yeah. I would say that, again, the only reason why I think that you should do it is for things like alts. Or if you are looking at a line that is different from the line that you see, but most places now have a whole bunch of different book lines that you can see.
But you're not simulating for the alts. It's just that you're displaying that the thing is that you're not simulating anything. Is that on our RotoGrinders projections, it doesn't show you what the 75th percentile is or the 80th percentile. We have that. We've already simulated it. We don't need to simulate it again. It's just that maybe we should display those numbers. Cardi displays those numbers. So that's what you would use. Tyreek, that's why, especially for the guys that have like outlier types of distributions where, Tyreek Hill's alt over 95 yards is actually priced better than his mean, 84.5. And you're getting actually a better price on that because the books didn't, have a normal distribution while we have a much more lopsided distribution.
Right.
It's not that you need to simulate that. It's just that we currently don't display that information in the screen. I mean, in the prop screens that we have here at RotoGrinders.
Yeah.
So what are you working on? Football's over. We got baseball in 7 weeks. We got the NBA All-Star break. What are you working on Pay Dirt?
Man, big thing is MLB season long right now. So building out, it's kind of going to be the first year that I offer season long projections all the way through the year, and rankings, stuff like that. So building that out right now, and then getting some things set up. I need to finish the contest sim stuff for baseball, but for the most part, baseball's already built out. I don't think I'm going to offer any or too many new things. I'll add in game logs, but just getting ready for baseball. And then obviously we still have NBA and NHL and esports going on. So all that stuff. Actually, another cool thing. The Madden model is back, Jordan.
Oh, wow. Those contests still exist?
They still every day, Jordan. So I'll have that back up this week.
You go to paydirtdfs.com for that. You can go get our 15-hour audio DFS masterclass as well as the advanced player's guide with our custom Excel tools at theoryofdfs.com. I mean, I use all of this. I use the Excel tools that James has built. I use SimLabs. I use Lineup HQ. Everything I show on this show, I use. So if you want to use the same thing, if you want to learn the theory of daily fantasy sports, because that'll help you. And so you use SimLabs and understand how this all works, right? And the more that you understand how this all works, the more you're able to attack any game, right? We got these pick six contests on DraftKings now, not available in my state, but anytime a new game, anytime a new format, all these concepts still apply. So the more and more you drill into your brain the mathematical concepts, the game theory of DFS, the more you're able to attack essentially anything, any sport, any format, any peer-to-peer game, any non-peer-to-peer game, even sports betting, all of it. You're able to attack it all. So learn about that at theoryofdfs.com. Hit that thumbs up on your way out the door. The likey likes. I love the likey likes. Hit the subscribe button. We got NBA later today. We got a small NHL slate. Tomorrow we'll be talking with Tim. Should be back tomorrow for NHL, talking about the slate. Then hit the notification bell. You'll always know when we go live. Got the NBA All-Star break coming up, so just be aware that next week, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, not Wednesday, there'll be no shows. I'll be here Friday. There's no NBA on Friday, but we still got a UFC pay-per-view card, so we'll be talking to MMA on Friday. I guess the schedule this week is NHL tomorrow mostly, then NBA on Wednesday mostly. Thursday is grab bag, I guess. Friday we'll talk about MMA, maybe some soccer, who knows. That's what I'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. That's why I'm here Monday through Friday, 11 o'clock Eastern, talking about all things you're thinking about in daily fantasy, props, and pick'em on RotoGrinders Today.